Thank you so much for coming out tonight. My name is Cassidy Westron. I work here at the List Visual Arts Center as the Public Programs Coordinator. Tonight we're here for a graduate student talk with Léa Miranda. This is a series where we invite graduate students to expand on their exhibitions using their expertise in a similar subject matter as a way to see how art and research are overlapping on MIT's campus. Tonight we'll be hearing from Léa, a doctoral student in the History, Theory, and Criticism of Art and Architecture program at MIT. Her research explores the history of photographic archives, examining how the shifting status of photography in the 19th century shaped archival practices and preservation, and how these biases continue to influence photographic history and collections today. She has worked as an independent researcher for the French Ministry of Culture and at various cultural institutions in France and the United States. Léa Miranda holds an MA in art history and law from the Sorbonne. In this talk, Léa Miranda will discuss the relationships between property, labor, capital, and artistic production, which have long influenced the history of art through the specific example of photography. She'll engage with Sofia Giovannitti's work on contractual structures to explore possible ways in which the commodifying regime of visual experiences can be broken down. In light of this, she will discuss how we, artists, patrons, historians, and viewers, can negotiate, resist, and rethink these power dynamics. At the end, we'll have a Q&A where you'll have a chance to ask any questions you may have. With that, I will hand it off to Léa. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cassidy, for the introduction and the generous invitation. Hi, everyone. I'm so glad to see colleagues, friends, students, advisors here today. I want to extend my thanks to the List Center and the technical and logistical teams for making this event happen. I'm thrilled to have the opportunity to talk about my work in dialogue with the exhibition Performing Conditions, Artistic Labor and Dependency as Form, and especially with the work of Sofia Giovannitti. I had the pleasure of meeting Sofia just a few days ago, and I'm grateful for the rich conversation we shared. I should say, in the past, I was used to giving talks in French, but then I moved to the US and everything became confusing in terms of social interactions. But I believe this discomfort I'm experiencing is actually quite relevant to what I want to discuss today, and I will return to that point later. When Cassidy and I began discussing the show, I was particularly drawn to the work of Sofia as I noticed synergies between her analysis of contractual and power dynamics within the art world and the current research I'm conducting here at MIT on historical narratives and visual representations. More specifically, I work on how photographic documents preserved in archives participate in the construction of social, legal, and political realities from the 19th century to nowadays. In other words, I'm interested in visual phenomena such as why do we believe what we see, or the evidentiary power of photographs. My work involves tracing the history of this phenomena through the study of archives and often the lacks within them, and explain why they deserve attention today. The aim of my presentation today is twofold. First, I will explore how visual representations, and especially photography, have historically been entangled with systems of domination and authority. Then, I want to reflect on and invite you to think about the ways in which we can identify, condemn, and expose these systems through the works of thinkers and artists, and more specifically through the work of Sofia Giovannitti. To situate this presentation, I would like to take a step back in history and briefly focus on the invention and the spread of photography in the early 19th century, an event that disrupted our relation to the visual. Often framed as a technical triumph that overcame the Promethean struggle to permanently fix an image onto a support, the emergence of photography must be, most importantly, understood as the birth of a new social visual regime that profoundly changed the way in which images are produced, used, and interpreted. The medium truth to nature characteristic led to its association with evidentiary value. Unlike earlier forms of image production, photographs were seen as visual evidence. This perception of photography as a truthful medium contributed to the belief that photographs could then serve as objective records. Consequently, photographs were appreciated not only as representations, but also as possible tools for authoritarian assertions. What could be seen could be owned, and what could be owned could then be displayed, reproduced, and remembered as such. An important example of this development is the first photo book ever created, The Pencil of Nature, written by Henry Fox Talbot between 1844 and 1846. When publishing this book, Talbot was responding to a broader debate about the invention of photography, and especially the paternity over the invention. As the creator of the negative-positive process, Talbot was taken short by the public release of the daguerreotype process by the French government a few years earlier in 1839. This book was thus Talbot's attempt to assert his own authorship and to establish a history of photography in which he occupies a central position. I'd like to pause here for a moment and talk about the legal term paternity, because today scholars are re-examining this notion, particularly in light of gender and identity. But in this early 19th century context, the use of such language also highlights the deeply masculine structures that shaped the development of the medium. Within this book, Talbot presents a series of images intended to demonstrate photography's potential applications. In one plate in particular, titled Article of China, he carefully arranged and photographed objects from his personal collection. Alongside the image, he wrote, quote, "Should a thief afterward purloin the treasures, if the mute testimony of the picture were to be produced against him in court, it would be certainly evidence of a novel kind." End quote. Here, the photograph is not simply a visual document, but it is an instrument of visual evidence anticipating a future use of the visual within systems of property and law. The collection of photographs by Queen Victoria and Prince Albert is another great example of the medium's use towards power dynamics as early as the mid-19th century. They not only collected prints, but also commissioned many photographs, actively engaging in the evolution of photographic ontologies. As the first royal couple to live outside of London, they used photographs to showcase their wealth and ability to acquire mansions throughout the country, simultaneously spreading visual reminders of their existence and authority. This bourgeois habit of picturing property is even more important, is even more concerning when it comes to human property. It was common during that time to commission portraits of enslaved individuals who were forced to pose at the photographer's discretion, the portraits serving as proof of ownership. As a side note, I would like to cite the book Exposing Slavery by Matthew Fox Amato as a great contribution on that topic. And as you can imagine, this obviously raises important questions about the objectification of photographic subjects, a concern that remains relevant today. What I'm highlighting by mentioning these early cases is that from the early beginning, photography has been employed to produce constructed, produced, and potentially instrumentalized narratives that materialize some social and political order. Although those examples may seem anecdotal, they are actually foundational to our understanding of visual media as means of asserting authority over property, social identity, and power. With the explosion of visual production, and if visual representations are historically embedded within systems of authority and control, a good question to ask now is how, then, can we break down those commodified regimes of visual experiences? In a world of visibility as capital, one way to approach this issue is through the concept of opacity, le droit à l'opacité, as articulated by Édouard Glissant in the book Poetics of Relation. He defines opacity as the subject's right to exist beyond the reducive categories imposed by dominant frameworks. It is a resistance to objectifying and absolutist logics that undergird both visual regimes and capitalist systems. Opacity is not just a philosophical position, but a political one. But now, let me try to connect those ideas to today's discussion more specifically. And well, my research focuses on the dynamics between photographers and their subjects. Sofia Giovannitis acknowledged a similar pattern between performance artists and their audience. Within contemporary regimes of representation, to be seen is frequently understood as a condition of recognition and as value measurements. And as we tend to define artists by their production, the effect is exponential. I believe that the concept of opacity is again relevant and that the work of Sofia Giovannitis provides a compelling take on such a dynamic. Next to me is Confession Prototype 1, a 43-minute performance documentation of a lecture the artist gave in New York in 2025. The thing is, I cannot tell you about this piece because I signed a non-disclosure agreement, which is required to access the work. So we are now in this tongue-in-cheek situation where I am a scholar interested in this work, yet viewing it makes me unable to tell you about it. As a reminder, NDAs are legally binding contracts that establish a confidential relationship to protect sensitive information from public disclosure and may lead to legal prosecutions if not respected. Although an NDA appears to be a powerful legal tool, its effectiveness here is quite illusory given the rather low stakes involved. And I actually double-checked that information before saying it out loud. But while I could choose to respect or violate this contract, after all, one might say that it is just a piece of paper that nobody fully reads. The responsibility for navigating this situation falls on me rather than on the artist. With this work, Sofia Giovannitis is making us aware of the dynamics of power that are part of our modern social contracts and our relation to artistic spheres. She is using this legal tool as a discursive form of self-reflection. This work is neither a simple object to be viewed nor a repressive one, but an invitation to have a different experience of the art we look at and to step out of our comfort zone and take a risk by doing so. This can be contextualized within the historical movement of conceptual arts, where the artists aim to critique art as an object, as a status, and its institutionalization. It is what the art historian Benjamin Buchloh calls the aesthetic of administration, where art replicates social realities and commodifying systems. While conceptual artists sought to eliminate visuality and redefine expectations of art, Giovannitis creates a visual representation of a performance meant to be ephemeral, incorporating the external viewer as a necessary element in recognizing the social experience. She draws on direct references from the culture industry, acknowledging the art world's complacency to commodification and implicitly presents a form of resistance. This dynamic is further explored in the work Contract, which is a performance that is currently happening every day until Sunday. The artist arranged for the Lee Center to close one of the galleries for a week and stages a performance accessible only to visitors willing to pay $1,000 adjusted for inflation since the work was created in 2022. For your information, there's a 20% discount for people affiliated with art institutions and lawyers, as the artist wants to encourage such categories to engage with this work. So if this works, have you feeling slightly uncomfortable? Well, I think it's kind of the point. With this, Sofia Giovannitti urges us to reckon with the power dynamic inherent in art and, as I've attempted to demonstrate in this presentation, are historically rooted in visual culture and especially photography. In continuation of this and as a conclusion, I would like to encourage us, viewers, historians, patrons, and so on, to contemplate our expectations of artistic production and labor and reflect on why, when the structures under which our experience of art are brought to light, does it feel so uncomfortable, but also how embracing this discomfort might be for the better. Thank you.